I thought she was just my neighbor, until that stormy night, when a single knock on my door changed everything I believed about love, trust, and the kind of closeness you never see coming. I used to think of her as just my neighbor, nothing more, nothing less. She lived a few steps away, in that small white house with the wooden balcony that always smelled faintly of Sampaguita at night. Every morning, when I'd leave for work or head to the store, I'd see her watering her plants, the sunlight catching strands of her hair. She always looked composed, graceful in the way she moved, like someone who carried both confidence and quiet sorrow at the same time. She wasn't the type to linger in long conversations. A polite nod, a gentle smile, a soft good morning. That was usually all I got from her. And yet, there was something about those small exchanges that stayed with me. I began to notice details I shouldn't have cared about. The way she brushed a loose lock of hair behind her ear when she bent toward her garden, or how she would pause before unlocking her front door, as though she was bracing herself for silence inside. Sometimes, when I sat by my window at night, I'd catch glimpses of her sitting alone on her balcony. The dim yellow light behind her framed her in soft shadows. She would hold a cup of tea, her eyes distant, her face carrying the weight of thoughts she never shared. I'd wonder what she was thinking about, but of course I never asked. She was my neighbor, and neighbors had boundaries. Still, there were moments that made me question if she noticed me too. Once, when I came home carrying a heavy bag of groceries, I looked up and saw her at the balcony. Our eyes met. For a second longer than polite, she stayed there, watching, almost as if she wanted to offer help but stopped herself. She gave a small smile before retreating inside. Another time, I caught her glancing at me when I was fixing my motorcycle. She turned away too quickly, as though embarrassed to be caught looking. I told myself not to read too much into it. She was older, experienced, someone who had clearly lived through more than I could understand. And me? I was just the young guy next door. Nothing about me was remarkable. If she noticed me at all, it was probably out of neighborly courtesy. Nothing deeper than that. But still, I couldn't shake the feeling that she carried a story untold. A kind of hidden longing that no one else saw. A part of me wanted to step closer, to ask, "Are you all right? Do you want to talk?" But each time I held back. I didn't want to intrude, didn't want to seem foolish. At the time, she was simply there. A gentle presence on the edge of my life. Familiar, comforting, yet distant enough to be untouchable. I had no idea how much that would change. How one night, one stormy, unforgettable night, would blur every boundary I thought existed between us, and reveal the truth I had been blind to all along. The storm arrived earlier than expected. One moment the sky was only dim, the clouds swollen with the promise of rain, and the next, thunder cracked like a warning shot across the heavens. By the time I closed my windows, the rain had begun. Not the gentle kind that cools the earth, but the kind that falls in angry sheets, drumming against the roof until it felt like the world itself was shaking. I sat by my small wooden table, listening to the downpour, when a sharp knock echoed through the house. For a second I thought I imagined it. Who would be outside in weather like this? But then it came again, louder, urgent. I hurried to the door and opened it, only to find her standing there. She was drenched. Her blouse clung to her skin, her hair darkened and heavy against her shoulders, raindrops streaming down her face. She looked almost startled to see me, as though she hadn't planned to come but had no other choice. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice raised over the rain. "I was outside trying to save the laundry, and then it just—" She gestured helplessly at the storm behind her. Without thinking, I stepped aside. "Come in." For a moment, she hesitated. Maybe she wasn't used to asking for help. Maybe pride kept her rooted at the doorway. But another crash of thunder made her flinch, and finally, she stepped into my home. I quickly fetched a towel and handed it to her. She accepted it with a soft, breathless thank you, her fingers brushing mine, cold and trembling from the rain. She wrapped the towel around her shoulders, sitting gingerly on the edge of my couch. The storm outside roared, but inside there was only the sound of water dripping from her hair onto the fabric, and the quiet rustle of her trying to dry herself. "I'll make you some tea," I said, more to fill the silence than anything else. In the kitchen, I tried to focus on the kettle, but I couldn't help glancing back at her. She looked smaller than usual, almost fragile, her figure outlined by the soft light of the lamp. Her eyes, usually guarded, seemed distant, like the storm had opened something in her that she couldn't hide. When I returned with the steaming cup, she accepted it with both hands. The rising warmth fogged her face for a second, and I noticed the faint tremble in her lips before she managed a small smile. "Thank you," she said softly, this time not just for the tea. I sat across from her, the storm raging beyond the walls. And in that moment, the space between us felt different. Closer. More alive. The rain had forced her to my door, but something else, something unspoken, seemed to settle quietly between us. I didn't know it yet, but that night was only beginning to change everything. The rain came down in heavy sheets, drumming against the tin roofs and echoing through the narrow alleys of the neighborhood. Streets that were usually filled with laughter and the smell of home-cooked dinners now lay drowned in silence, save for the roar of the storm. It was the kind of night that forced people indoors, gathering around candlelight and praying the power wouldn't give out. But for me, that night was far more than just another storm. It was the night everything I thought I knew about my neighbor changed forever. I had always seen Daniel, my quiet, reserved neighbor, as just another familiar face on the street. He greeted politely, helped carry groceries once in a while, and disappeared back into his modest home without drawing much attention. In many ways, he was like the rain itself, present, predictable, and easily overlooked. But that night, with the storm raging outside, fate brought us together in a way I never expected. The power had cut out an hour earlier, plunging the block into darkness. I lit a few candles, trying to read by their flickering glow when I heard a faint knock at my door. At first, I ignored it, thinking it was just the wind rattling the wood. But the knock came again, deliberate and soft. My heart quickened as I rose and approached the door, uncertain who would be out in such weather. When I opened it, there he was, Daniel, drenched to the bone, his hair plastered against his forehead, his clothes clinging to him. He looked desperate, almost fragile in the dim light. "I'm sorry," he said over the roar of the storm. "My roof is leaking badly. I just needed a place to stay until it passes." Without thinking twice, I let him in. The storm outside was merciless, and I couldn't bear the thought of anyone enduring it alone. He stepped inside, shivering, his eyes filled with gratitude that seemed to hold more weight than his simple words. I offered him a towel and some dry clothes that once belonged to my brother, and as he changed in the other room, I felt a strange unease creeping into my chest. It wasn't fear, it was something deeper, something that pulled me toward him in ways I couldn't yet understand. When he returned, dressed in borrowed clothes, we sat by the small table, listening to the storm rage on. At first, the silence between us was heavy, but slowly he began to speak. He told me about the loneliness of living alone, the struggles he carried quietly, and how storms always made him feel like a child again, helpless, vulnerable, and searching for comfort. His voice trembled at times, not from cold but from the weight of truths he rarely shared. In that moment, I realized he wasn't just my neighbor. He wasn't just another face on the street. Beneath his quiet exterior was a soul filled with stories, pain, and unspoken desires. And as the rain hammered down outside, the walls I had built around myself began to crack. I saw him differently, closer, warmer, and far more significant than I had ever imagined. That night, as thunder rolled and lightning illuminated his face in fleeting flashes, something shifted between us. A silent understanding, a bond neither of us expected, took root. And though the storm eventually passed, the memory of that rainy night would never leave me. It was the night I stopped seeing Daniel as just a neighbor, and began seeing him as something far more. The storm had passed by morning, leaving behind puddles that mirrored the gray sky and streets littered with fallen branches. Yet inside my home, the silence between Daniel and me carried its own kind of storm, a quiet tension that lingered long after the rain stopped. Something had shifted. I could feel it in the way he moved, in the way his eyes lingered on mine as though words were forming but refusing to leave his lips. We sat together at the kitchen table, sipping coffee I had brewed more out of nervous habit than need. My hands trembled slightly as I set his cup down, and for a fleeting second, our fingers brushed. That single touch sent an unexpected current through me. Soft, electric, and impossible to ignore. I caught myself staring too long, and when our eyes met, it was as though he saw right through me, into a part of myself I had never shown anyone. But there was something else too, something unsettling that I couldn't name. Daniel carried a heaviness with him, like a shadow that refused to let go. He smiled politely, thanked me again for letting him stay the night, yet his words didn't quite match the look in his eyes. They were guarded, as though hiding truths too dangerous to reveal. As the morning stretched on, the neighborhood slowly came back to life. Neighbors stepped out to sweep mud from their porches. Children splashed in puddles, and roosters crowed late as if announcing a new day. But inside, the air felt different. Charged, secretive, fragile. I asked Daniel if he wanted breakfast, and his answer came with a hesitation that caught me off guard. I should probably go, he said softly, placing the untouched coffee cup back on the table. But he didn't move. He just sat there, fingers tracing the rim of the mug, eyes darting to the window as though searching for something beyond the horizon. I leaned forward, my curiosity overtaking my restraint. "Daniel?" I whispered. "Are you okay? You don't have to keep things bottled up. Not here. Not with me." For a long moment he didn't speak. The silence stretched so thin I thought it might break. Then he let out a sigh, heavy and raw, like he had been holding it for years. "There are things about me," he finally said, voice barely audible. "Things I don't talk about. People wouldn't understand." His gaze flicked to me then, vulnerable and sharp all at once. If they knew, everything would change. My heart raced. I wanted to ask what he meant, wanted to press for answers, but I stopped myself. The weight in his words warned me that pushing too hard might drive him away. Instead, I simply nodded, offering a small smile, letting him know without words that his secrets were safe with me. In that moment, I realized this wasn't just about a lonely neighbor seeking shelter from a storm. Daniel's silence was protecting something. Something hidden, something dangerous, something that could alter the fragile balance of our lives. And though I didn't yet know what it was, I felt myself being drawn deeper, unable to resist. That morning, the storm outside had ended. But inside, another one was only beginning. The days after the storm unfolded in a strange rhythm. Quiet yet charged, ordinary yet filled with an undercurrent that neither Daniel nor I could ignore. He returned to his own place across the street, but somehow the distance between our homes felt smaller. Each time I glimpsed him from my window, fixing his gate, carrying groceries, pausing to look at the sky, my chest tightened in ways I couldn't explain. It wasn't long before another knock echoed on my door, this time not from Rain but from Daniel himself. He stood there with an awkward smile, holding a small bag of calamansi. He said his cousin had sent from the province. "I thought you might like some," he explained, voice low but warm. It was such a simple gesture, and yet my heart fluttered. We ended up sitting on the porch, the late afternoon sun painting the street gold. The air was cool, carrying the earthy scent of damp soil after days of rain. Conversation came easier than before. He spoke about little things. His love for books, how he missed his late grandmother's cooking, the quiet he found in early mornings. Every detail he shared felt like a gift, a piece of him carefully placed in my hands. And in return, I found myself opening up in ways I hadn't expected. I told him about the loneliness of living alone after my children moved away, about the nights that stretched too long, about how I sometimes wondered if life still held surprises for me. He listened intently, his eyes never leaving mine. There was no judgment, no impatience, only presence. And in that presence I felt seen. At one point, a soft breeze blew across the porch, lifting strands of my hair into my face. Before I could tuck them back, Daniel reached over gently, his fingers brushing against my temple as he tucked the hair behind my ear. The touch was feather-light, almost hesitant, yet it lingered in my skin long after. My breath caught, and for a moment the world seemed to pause. His hand trembled slightly as if he too was overwhelmed by the closeness. Neither of us spoke immediately, but the silence wasn't empty. It was full, thick with something unnamed yet undeniable. I felt my pulse quicken, not out of fear, but out of the sudden realization that this wasn't just neighborly kindness anymore. Something fragile and dangerous was blooming between us, as real as the fading light on the horizon. I pulled away slightly, offering a smile to soften the weight of the moment. "Thank you for the calamansi," I said, my voice steady even though my heart was not. He nodded, lips curving into a smile that was almost shy, but his eyes told me everything. He felt it too. That night, as I lay in bed, I replayed every detail. The way his fingers trembled, the warmth in his gaze, the quiet safety I felt beside him. Scared me, this pull, but it also lit a fire I hadn't felt in years. The storm had introduced us, but this was the first spark of something far more dangerous and far more beautiful. The spark that had ignited between us did not fade. It grew quietly, weaving itself into the rhythm of our days. What began as simple conversations on the porch soon turned into shared dinners, long walks down the muddy lanes of our neighborhood, and silences that said more than words ever could. Yet with every smile, every glance that lingered too long, the tension deepened, drawing us into a space neither of us could pretend away. One evening, Daniel arrived at my door carrying a basket of vegetables from the market. "I thought we could cook together," he said, his smile nervous but hopeful. I hesitated only a second before letting him in. Soon we were shoulder to shoulder in the kitchen, chopping, stirring, tasting. The air filled with the aroma of garlic and ginger sizzling in the pan, but beneath it, there was another fragrance I couldn't escape. The warmth of his presence, the faint scent of rain still clinging to his clothes, the closeness of his breath when he leaned in to ask if the seasoning was right. At one point, our hands brushed as we both reached for the ladle. I froze, the contact sending a shiver through me. His hand lingered just a moment longer than it should have, his eyes locking onto mine with a question he didn't dare speak aloud. I felt my chest tighten, my throat dry, as though the entire world balanced on whether I pulled away or stayed still. I stayed still. Later, as we sat down to eat, the tension didn't leave. It thickened. The candlelight from the table flickered across his face, softening his features, highlighting the quiet strength in his jaw, the vulnerability in his eyes. Conversation drifted to safer topics, but the undercurrent was unmistakable. Each time he laughed, I found myself leaning closer. Each time I spoke, I felt his gaze linger a little too long, as if memorizing every detail. When dinner ended, neither of us moved to clear the table. Instead, we sat in the stillness, listening to the hum of crickets outside and the soft drumming of my own heartbeat. Then, Daniel spoke, his voice low, steady, yet threaded with hesitation. "You know this, whatever this is, it's not simple. People wouldn't understand." His words were heavy, and yet beneath them was something raw and unguarded. Desire, fear, hope all tangled into one. I felt my hands tremble, but instead of answering with reason, I reached out, placing my hand gently over his. His fingers tightened instinctively around mine, as though he had been waiting for that moment. In that fragile connection, we both admitted what neither of us could deny anymore. We were no longer just neighbors, no longer just two people sharing meals and silences. We were standing on the edge of something that could shatter us or save us. That night, when he left, the air in the house still carried his warmth. My heart raced with both dread and longing. The tension had reached a point of no return. Whatever happened next, there would be no going back. The days after that dinner blurred into one another, yet every moment seemed sharper, more alive. Each knock at my door, each passing smile from Daniel across the street, carried a weight that made my heart stumble. The tension that had been simmering between us was no longer something we could tuck neatly beneath casual words or polite distance. It lived in our gestures, in the way our eyes lingered, in the silence that grew too full to ignore. One evening, the sky turned crimson as the sun sank low, and Daniel appeared again at my gate. He didn't carry groceries or gifts this time. He simply stood there, his hands in his pockets, his expression solemn but filled with something deeper, something that reached me before he even spoke. "Can we walk?" he asked softly. We wandered down the narrow road that wound past rice fields, the air filled with the scent of earth cooling after the heat of the day. Fireflies flickered in the distance, and the world seemed to hush, as if waiting for us to finally give voice to the truth we'd both been circling. "I keep telling myself to stop," Daniel admitted after a long silence. His voice cracked in a way I hadn't heard before. "To step back, to remember how this looks to the world. But then I see you, and all I feel is drawn closer." His words hit me with both fear and comfort. I had been telling myself the same things, that the whispers of neighbors, the judgments of others, could crush us. And yet, standing there beside him, the thought of denying what I felt seemed impossible. I slowed my steps and turned to face him. The last rays of sunset painted his face in shades of gold and shadow. "Daniel," I whispered, my voice unsteady. "I've lived my whole life doing what was proper, what people expected. But this, whatever it is between us, it makes me feel alive in a way I thought I'd lost forever." His breath caught, and in that instant all the walls between us broke. He stepped closer, his hand reaching for mine. His touch was tentative, trembling. Yet when our fingers intertwined, it was as if the world finally aligned. My heart pounded, not with the fear of being seen, but with the truth of being chosen. He didn't kiss me. He didn't need to. The closeness, the warmth of his hand, the way his forehead leaned gently against mine, it was enough. Enough to know that what we shared wasn't fleeting, wasn't an accident. It was something real, something neither of us could turn away from anymore. When we walked back, we didn't speak of labels or futures. We didn't make promises we couldn't keep. But the silence between us had changed. It was no longer heavy with tension. It was full, tender, alive. That night, as I lay in bed, I realized that love doesn't always arrive the way you expect, or when the world thinks it should. Sometimes it comes like a storm, unexpected and impossible to ignore. And sometimes, just sometimes, it stays even when everything says it shouldn't. Daniel was no longer just my neighbor. He was the truth the rain had revealed, the love I never thought I'd find again. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more true love stories that remind us how unexpected connections can change our lives. Sparkling Hearts, share this with someone who still believes in love against the odds. And let me know in the comments what you would have done if you were in their place. 5L